So we're going to look at poetry written by women of Sephardic origin. We already saw Freha bat Adiva, but I found her on the scholars. We'll start with Dunash ben Labrat and his wife. We'll start with the letter of his wife, which is in the scans, and then we'll read his response. Now, Dunash was one of the first grammarians, a famous grammarian, poet, very knowledgeable person. He spent his life moving on that axis between Spain, Iraq, and Morocco, which I mentioned before. That was a lot of Jews in early medieval time in the what I call the Sephardic world moved along these routes from Spain to Iraq to Morocco, and no one is clear on where exactly was he born and where he ended his life. There's a lot of confusion about that. At a certain point of his life, he lived in Spain, but because he got into some kind of trouble with his patron, most of the poets in Spain had the patronage of a wealthy person, and he got into trouble with him, and he was forced to leave the country. And he lived in Spain at the time, and he left his wife behind. And his wife wrote a poem to rebuke him for his behavior, meaning she's blaming him for being irresponsible, and with this behavior he caused himself to be exiled from Spain and therefore abandoned her. And that's the only thing that we have from her. It's late 10th century, but it's pretty amazing to see this kind of command of the Hebrew language. Those of you who read Hebrew, you realize that this is a very fine Hebrew written according to the rules of poetry or early poetry. So not only she's married to a poet, she can write her own verses. And so let's read it first in Hebrew and in English. So she writes this to him after he already left Spain. She says, "Hayizkor ya'alat achen yedidah beyom perud uvizro'a yehida v'sam chotam yemino al semola uvizro'o halosama tzemida." So he says, would the Yadid, would the lover remember his graceful doe, beyom perud uvizro'a yehida, when he separated from her while she was carrying her only child, v'sam chotam yemino al semola, he put the seal of his right hand on her left, and she placed her bracelet on his left hand. Beyom lokho lezikaron redido, v'hu lakach lezikaron redida. She took as a memento, as a keepsake, her mantle, her scarf, and she took his. Hayishaer bechol eretz Sefarad, v'lu lakach hatzi malchut negida. Is he not able to stay anywhere in Spain, even if he would be paid half the riches of the prince? Meaning she's rebuking, she's asking, why weren't you able to stay with me in Spain? So that is the poem of Dunash ben Labrat, probably the earliest poem that we have of a woman that writes with this style, of poetry. Dunash responded. He says, "Hayom moti ahavtem, ait ketavtem habagadta vehefarta esarim." Did you desire my death when you wrote, "Have you betrayed and broken the vows?" Ve'ech evgod b'maskelet kmotech, ve'el tziva alei eshet ne'orim. How can I betray a scholar such as you when God commanded me regarding the wife of my youth? He refers to a verse in Malachi that speaks of one who betrays the wife of his youth and his friendship. She says, we have both the connection of intimate relationship from childhood, Eshet Ne'orim, but also your amazing intellect. So he's attracted to her not only because of that love, but also they have this intellectual bond, which we see from her writing. I can imagine just two poets married to each other. They're passing their time, even asking for a cup of tea or something, would be done in rhymes and in verse. It would be pretty powerful. It says, and velu zamam azov otach levavi gezartihu alei elef gezarim. And if my heart would have contemplated leaving you, I would tear it to 1,000 pieces. Being dramatic, and it's obvious that he, from his other writings, that he was sensitive and he cared about her, and he was forced to leave. But it's his temperament that caused him that, and he wasn't able to control it. By the way, Dunash ben Labrat is famous for one poem that became part of the repertoire of every Jewish home, and that's Deror Yikra. The song Deror Yikra was written by Dunash ben Labrat, and you could see his initials in every stanza. It's Deror Yikra lebenim bat dalet ve'yintzochem kemo babat, starts with Vav. Ne'im shemchem velo yishba, starts with Nun. Shevun u'hu b'yom Shabbat Shin. So in every stanza, there's an acrostic of his name. So that is the story of Dunash ben Labrat. More or less at the same time, the same period of Dunash ben Labrat, in Spain lives Rabbi Shmuel Nagid ibn Nagrila, and that is a completely different perspective of women. Rabbi Shmuel Nagid, it was Levi. They also called him Ibn Ismail. So he had the Hebrew name, he had the Arabic name. Was a prolific writer, was a scholar, was a rabbi. He was also a general of commanding the army of the Caliph of Granada, and he went to wars for him. And at one point, he even composed a poem while conducting a battle. And he later on recorded that poem. He says, "I was too busy to engage in battle, and I wasn't able to pray minha, so instead I composed that poem and I read it on the spot as the prayer." And there are several diwans, several anthologies of his poems. It's interesting that our next person here, Rabbi Moshe ibn Ezra, I think he's the one who wrote that. Did not appreciate. He lived about the next generation. He was born the year that Rabbi Shmuel Nagid Levi passed away. He did not appreciate much the poetry of Rabbi Shmuel Nagid in terms of its passion, and it was not forceful enough for him. So it was he felt that it was very rigid, very clearly written, but there was not enough emotion and power in it. So in one of his poems, Rabbi Moshe ben Ezra writes that he was at a party and the wine that was served was delicious because it was chilled, and it was so much colder, even colder than the songs of Rabbi Shmuel Hanavi ibn Nagrila. That's part of the culture that is really fascinating, and that's in itself, it's a field of study, just to know the poetry of the Golden Age in Spain, and the way that people basically revolved around hubs of intellectual prowess and poetry. When Rabbi Yehuda Levi traveled to Egypt, and the word about his arrival was spread, this is about in the 1100s. Immediately, people started making pilgrimage to the house where he was staying in Alexandria, offering him poems. Rabbis, local scholars. He corresponds with people all around poetry. So that was a mainstay of the culture at the time. So among the anthologies of Rabbi Shmuel Hanavi ibn Nagrila, there are two books called Ben Mishlei and Ben Kohelet. It sounds a little bit like an arrogant. We could say that he had I wouldn't say arrogance, but a streak of pride and acknowledgement of his self-worth. And he names his book the son of Proverbs and the son of Kohelet. In a way, he's suggesting that he's second to King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech, in wisdom. And in those they were written as maxims, as advices, just like the verses of Mishlei and Kohelet. And there he has several references to women that are not very positive. There's another one not written here where he rebukes a rabbi that he thought was not, or a head of a yeshiva, whom he thought was not knowledgeable enough. And the way he rebukes him is he tells him in a poem, of course, how dare you say every day, Shelo asani isha, how can you thank God for not making you a woman, while the way you teach and learn Torah show like a thousand witnesses that you are a woman. So it's very disparaging both to the rabbi and to women. So let us look, this is a different example, like I said, of poetry, that brings the negative side out, and that is from Rabbi Shmuel al-Nagid, lived 1993 to 1056, and here, this is in the scan, on page, I'll lose it, page 32, and this is from his Diwan Ben Mishlei. I marked some of them, but I would like to read this also. This Siman Tafshin Kavbet, 1722. Le'ezer nivreu nashim v'noach. You should read it as Le'ezer v'noach nivreu nashim. Women were created to serve husband, to serve men, and make them feel comfortable. Ve'en adam belo ezer ve'unach. And a man who is not married, who does not have a wife, could not really rest comfortably. ולא נמצא גביר ישב בבטחה והניח בני אדם והונח. And that's another thing, speaking about wealth. And one who is wealthy can never live calmly. He cannot let people be, and they will not let him be, meaning they always be engaged in his business. But that we could say is based on the biblical verse of Hashem says, I will create the woman to be an ezer, an aid or a serving mate to men. But look at what he says here in Tashkag 1723. Leisha na'asu kirot vetirot. For a woman were created walls and palaces, meaning she should be kept within the walls. Vetifarta peros mita umatve, and her glory is setting the beds and weaving wool. Remember that we mentioned this statement from the rabbis in the Talmud. They said, "En chokhma leisha ela bepelech." Women's wisdom is in the spindle. Let them weave wool. And he says, this is what would glorify her. As we'll see later on in Halacha, when they speak about the duties that a woman must fulfill towards her husband, one of them is setting the beds. That was considered a chore that was mandatory for women. And the rabbis later on debate whether it's mandatory for all, whether there are exceptions. But here he says it as a clear statement that this is what it should be. Some people argue that his influence through his poetry was immense because a lot of people read that. But we don't know how far reaching was the influence of this kind of poetry, because we'll see later on in the poetry of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi and Rabbi Moshe ben Ezra. There's a different approach, and he says on ufanea ke'erva al derachim velahem ne'erag tza'if umasveh. Even her face is considered immodest, like erva, erva could be either understood as a forbidden sexual relationship or something which is exposed. Al derachim, on the highway, so it's really alluding to prostitution. So he is very strong with this demand that the woman would stay indoors and not be revealed. Velahem ne'erag tza'if umasveh, and for her face, a scarf and a cover was woven. So that is in line with what we'll see later on of Maimonides, who says that a woman should not leave the house, and even if she lives in luxury and opulence within the house, she's not allowed to leave the house, and it is not recommended for the husband to let his wife be pa'am bashvakim, pa'am barrechovot. He goes on in Siman Tafshin Kaf Daled to say, "Le'eda lo tehi tikva ve'achrit asher titen meluchata leisha." That, I think, answers the question that was raised before: how did men react to powerful women or to learned women? We see the examples of the scholars, of the leaders, and we ask the question: how did men react? So here we have an example. He says, "Le'eda lo tehi tikva ve'achrit." A community or a congregation, a group of people, will have no hope and an ill-fated end. Asher titen meluchata leisha, if they will let a woman rule over them. V'sof kol am asher samu aleim shnei moshlim lechilayon uvusha. Similarly, those who have two governors at once are doomed. So he says very clearly that he doesn't believe that a woman could be a ruler. There were examples in his time of women who ruled certain kingdoms in Spain. I don't know if one very famous Tota, no, I think she was later after his time, but probably he knew of examples of women who were governors or rulers or queens, and he's not fond of them. In later on in the same book, in Siman Tet Tarlad, which is 1034, he says, "Kene heder lenashecha umasger, ve'al tavi lecha isha besodach, ve'al tatzdik asher tomar lecha ki emuna lo tedaber lach be'odach." He says, "Kene heder lenashecha," acquire a room for your wives, more than one wife. It's possible that he had more than one wife. We don't know. But he says, make a special room for them. That's sort of segregation. Make sure that they know their place. Umasgir, and make sure that room would be locked, so they cannot go out on their own. Ve'al tavi lecha isha besodach, and don't let a woman know your secrets. Ve'al tatzdik asher tomar lecha, and don't believe in what she said, what she tells you. Ki emuna lo tedaber lach be'odach, she will not tell you the truth ever. So, bottom line, we look at Rabbi Shmuel Nagid, and he asks the question: is he pro-women or anti-women? I think the answer is clear. You have an example of a leading scholar from Sepharad, prolific author, rabbi, poet, general, is a militant, who is not very fond of women. Is he threatened by them? Does he? It's not clear, but that's part. Could be the zeitgeist, could be the culture that he lives in, but that is his approach. From that, we move to another example from Sepharad. It's about 100 years, 200 years later. One second. Stop sharing this one. Let me go back there. Okay, so here we have two brief examples, only from the great poets, Rabbi Moshe ben Ezra and Rabbi Yehuda Levi. Those are two that are considered. Rabbi Yehuda Levi is considered Abi Ram Shorim, the greatest poet of the Golden Age. Rabbi Moshe ben Ezra, also a great poet. Both of them wrote many poems. Some of them liturgy, some of them what we call shirei hol, secular poetry. And the themes of the secular poetry was what we call shirei yain. There were songs about wine and feasts and love and nature. Beautiful poems. Here, those two quotes are about a very specific phenomenon. And an article I read by Yitzhak Granat speaks about the idea of alamot shir, of the singing women, that as I mentioned before, poetry was a central occupation for Jews in Spain and throughout the Arabic speaking world. That is part of it is because the Arabs were obsessed with poetry, and they also argued and claimed that the only language in which you could write beautiful poetry is Arabic. So the Jewish scholars took the challenge as, okay, we'll show you that we could write the same type of poetry in Hebrew, and they did. They wrote also in Arabic, they wrote also in Spanish or the Romance languages, but that was a major occupation. At the same time, Jews and Muslims had very good relationships, despite what you might have heard about the dhimmi, the decrees against the second-class citizens that included Christians and Jews in Spain, especially in Al-Andalus. Jews lived they had very good relations with the Muslim rulers. They were also courtiers, people who lived within the royal court or near the royal court and served as ministers and high level officials, and they would throw parties where people would come together and sing and dance. Just like we saw in Sipur David Roveni later on in Pisa, this is something that already existed in Spain for hundreds of years. And there is this phenomenon that is mentioned by both Rabbi Moshe ben Ezra and Rabbi Yehuda Levi of the singing women. Now, one could assume that they are only singing songs written by others, but from these two entries, we could maybe we can understand that they were learned and they could write their own songs and compose them on the spot. So here's the first one from Rabbi Moshe ben Ezra, is 11th century, and he says this: "Re'eh ma na'ama ofra teshorer, alei kino ותופפות עלמות, יספרו נועם יופייה בשירים, והיא להם תשורר שיר עלמות." See how pleasant is the girl singing with the lout, and the drumming maidens will tell of her beauty in song, and she will praise them with delicate verses. So, the Hebrew, you look at the Hebrew, there's a wordplay. Ofra is the feminine form of ofer, of a fawn. So it's a do, teshorer. She sings ale kino, with the kino that I translated loud because probably that was the instrument that she had. Vetofefot alamot. This is based on a verse in Tehillim. Betoch alamot tofefot. But those girls are praising the lead singer. Vehi lahem teshorer shir alamot, and she would sing back to them. But from the word that says lahem teshorer, it could be understood either that she just recites verses or she creates them on the spot. Rabbi Yehuda Levi also speaks about that. He says, "Shur im kara'a bat shahar shahrut shiryoneha el kol shirei hana'ara ve'kol shiryoneha." Beautiful wordplay in Hebrew. He rhymes the word shiryoneha as one word, shiryon, armor, with the word shir yoneha, the song of the dove, which is like a love song. So he says, "Shur, look, Haim kara'a bat shahar, did the maiden or the daughter of dawn, did she tear her dark armor?" Meaning the sun is rising and now the darkness of the night is torn apart and light comes out. And how does this light come out? To the sound of the girls' songs, V'kol Shirionea, her love song. And the author of this article, Yitzhak Granat, brings many, many other examples of this phenomenon of the singing women. And as I said, it's very possible that they were not just singers, but they were poets. It makes sense if we know of Dunash ben Labrat's wife, if we know of the other women that we mentioned here, and maybe even by looking at Rabbi Shmuel Hanavi Ibn Agrila that we read before, and his concern with scholarly women, maybe that was his reaction to what he saw around him, where women were competing with men. I'll add to that one more thing that Granat, I don't think that I saw that Granat mentioned it in his article, and that is that in the Islamic culture, women were definitely poets and composers. That is a very, very long tradition. Only that with the rise of Islam, the religious leaders initially tried to eradicate that memory and shift the balance from secular poetry and more festive poetry to religious one, but eventually it came back. So what they did, they referred to the pre-Islamic period as Jahiliyyah, the period of darkness or of ignorance. But there is a rich history of the musicians and poets who worked and wrote at that time from the 3rd century on, probably also with heavy Jewish influence in the Arabian Peninsula, and there were a lot of women among them. So this is an example of how the cultures affect each other, and maybe it's a different class of women that were destined to become entertainers, but they are intellectual entertainers. They're not just singers, they're not just musicians. They write their own poetry. They could maybe engage in intellectual conversation. The next person we'll look at very briefly, because we're not going to read all of her songs. They are sort of secular love songs, or about her history, about her suffering. The woman is named Kasmuna bint Ismail, and we don't know much about her. Some people theorize that her father was Rabbi Shmuel Anagid, because of Ismail. Shmuel is a similar. Doesn't really work perfectly in terms of the chronology. But with that, what we have, those are the few poems that we have, and I brought them here. She wrote in Arabic. لَصَاحِبٌ ذُو قَدْ قَبَلَتْ. I have a friend whose actions probably he has repaid good with evil. That is about her suffering. Just like the sun from which the moon derives its light, always, yet afterwards eclipses the sun's body. So the the first poem was written by her father, and she answers by that the sun derives its light from the moon. The moon derives its light from the sun, but later but it has the possibility to eclipse the sun itself. And with that, what she's trying to say, that you have a friend who does not appreciate what you did for him, meaning he's lesser than you, but he eclipses you. And here's another of her poems, where the time has come for harvesting, but I do not see a gardener reaching out a hand towards its fruits. Youth goes vanishing. I wait alone for somebody I do not wish to name. So not necessarily with the Jewish theme, but everybody's in agreement that Qasmuna was Jewish. And it was another example of a poet, a woman in Spain at that time. The next entry, we're going back to the negative, is Yehuda ben Shabbatai. Yehuda ben Shabbatai from Spain, around the time, a little bit later in the 12th to the 13th century, and the theme that he chose was of the quality traits of women and their behavior, etc. And it was not unique to Jews at the time. That was a common theme that we could say Christians and Muslims wrote more about it than Jews even. And that is, you have it in page 34 in the scanned material. That is from Haim Shirman's introduction to the work by Yudai Ben Shabbatai. He says in the about the seventh line, דעה שהייתה מקובלת על בני אירופה מאז ומתמיד, שאין האישה אלא כלי החטא והשחיתות. The common opinion among European authors has always been that the woman is just a vessel for sin and corruption. כידוע, התלוננו המשוררים של ימי הביניים הרבה על עיקשות הגבירות האכזריות המסרבות להיענות להם. It is well known that the troubadours, the poets of medieval times, used to complain that the cruel women would not answer their flirtations, they would not be with them. ואף על פי כן לא חדלו סופרי אותה תקופה להתריע שבנות חווה מכשילות את בני אדם. At the same time, they blamed women for being temptresses and putting obstacles in front of men. And Shirman adds that it was easy for them to do because the monopoly over literature and poetry was in the hand of men, so they could describe women as they wanted. They could, as evil or good. They want them, they don't want them. But it's important to know that when we talk about women's status, and we are reading Sephardic literature, it cannot be dissociated from the general culture, whether Muslim or Christian. And to have in mind that Christian culture didn't respect women too much. It was actually, we could go back in time, but I think it was the famous gathering of the church, of the early fathers of the church in Nicaea, where they came to the conclusion that women do possess a soul. And up until the 3rd century, they believed that women do not have souls. And so finally, they were willing to give it to them, but they said it's not the same soul as that of men. And of course, with the whole theory of the original sin and the sexual relationship are forbidden, women didn't have much to say for themselves. When we'll talk about marital laws and all that, maybe we'll be able to touch upon the phenomenon that happened in the 15th, 16th century, where among Christian women, where they would take upon themselves vows of celibacy, even though they were married, they had children already, but they decided to become celibate. In a way, it was their way to control their husbands, so they could keep them away from them, and could only be done in the name of religion. So in a way, religion sometimes does give a sort of powerful tool to women. So then our next person here is Yehuda ben Shabbatai. This poem, this is not a poem. It's called Makama. It's a longer work, and it's sort of a story. It's prose in rhymes, and the name of this book is Minhat Yehuda Soneh Hanashim, the gift of Yehuda, the misogynist. Can you imagine someone writing today a book and he puts in the title, "I am a misogynist. I hate women." But that's what he did. It could have been a joke. I mean, it could be an exaggeration. It could have been that he wrote it for by order, someone commissioned that work, but still, it's the willingness to do that, knowing that it could serve as a tool in the hands of people who are misogynist, doesn't really put him in a very positive light. I'll go here, even though this is again it's it's horizontal. So I'll read from the text here on some verses. In page 36, line 12, it says, "Ve'al yavilcha zman hamarbe avla v'cholpe dover nevala." Do not be concerned by those who say that time only brings destruction, and you cannot trust anyone. כי כל האנשים נבקע עצתם, תחו מראות עיניהם השכילי בותם. All people are without counsel, they don't know what they're doing. ואם גדל פשעם וחובם, נשהם ייתו לבבם. If you see that they are not behaving correctly, it's not their fault. It's their wives, it's their women who cause them to do that. Then he says, "Kimi yatir avotot asher hanashim osot." Who could untangle the knots, the planters in Hebrew, in Yiddish? Who can untangle the complications created by women? Derech nechoha yegareshu v'et kol hayeshara ya'akeshu. They drive away the right path and they distort it. This I'm in line 15 in the 35th page of the scan. חברתן ואהבתן כרגע, על פיהן יהיה כל ריב וכל נגע. Their friendship and association is momentary, it's temporary, and they cause all fights and all plagues. And in line 18, he even exaggerates to say, בי נשבעתי, לא הנחש הערים על חווה ולא עליה ציווה. It was not the fault of the serpent who caused Hava to sin, but rather it was her fault. She caused her husband to be exiled. She caused the serpent to eat dust. In line 20, ואם בניה פשעם ידכאם, היא הייתה האם. And if her children are suffering, it's because of her sin. She is the mother. And then he mentions the terafim that were stolen by Rachel, ועל עורות גדיי העזים, the skins, the hides of the goats that Yaakov wore, and it was the advice of his mother, and Dinah, and then it says, Lulea nezalim. Yes?
You know, it sounds like the man doth protest too much.
Yes. No, obviously, as I said, this is an atypical.
Had a bad relationship with
one
woman,
yes,
and decided that they all are horrible and evil. And he's, when you take this much time to be that critical,
yeah, something right, something is right. But that's why I said in the introduction, he was a writer for hire. He wrote books by commission, and could be that he had this bad relation with his wife. Could be that because maybe that's why I called it Minhat Yehuda, the gift of Yehuda, the misogynist. That this is a gift that he gives to someone who needs to use it as ammunition against his wife. He definitely exaggerates. He doesn't, even in the few places in rabbinic literature where the rabbis were were pro women. He twists it, like in line 24, he says, Lulea nezamim lo na'asa ha'egel liksom kesamim. Without the jewelry, Aharon would not have been able to create the golden calf. Meanwhile, the Midrash says several times that the women never gave their jewelry for the golden calf, and it was the men who gave all their accessories. And in verse 26, he adds, Ve'avram al yosher pa'olo bat lo hayta lo. Avraham, because he was a righteous man, he was rewarded by not having a daughter. Again, he goes against the Midrash that says that Avraham be'echet Avraham bakol, that Avraham was blessed with a daughter. In the next page, in the first line, he says, "Ve'hosif le'Iyov mishne al kol hatovot milevad hanekevot." Eov, everything was taken away from Eov, and eventually everything was doubled. So he says, but he had 3 girls to begin with, and at the end he also had 3 daughters. So they were not doubled because it's not good, it's not a blessing. So, yeah, obviously he's not very happy with his life, not very happy with his relationship with women, and he concludes, this is the angel who speaks to him, sort of in this poem. And he says, ויען המלאך הדובר בי ויאמר, ראה שכל פרעה ויתבונן דעו Look how wise was Paro and how smart he was when he set out to torture the Jews, the Israelites. Asher עינה אותם והגדיל תוגתם והמית הבנים וחייה הבנות. He caused them so much suffering by killing only the sons but letting the daughters live. So I would say that the exaggeration here, that it really borders on cruelty, and the way he distorts the midrash before could show either that that person was really disgruntled and had a lot of personal issues, or that he wrote it, as I said before, as it was a commissioned work and he wanted to make money from it, but he did pepper it with some hints to say, this is not what I think. I'm not saying it is being apologetic. I'm sure that if not him, there were others who wanted that. I mean, someone ordered it from him. That means that there was someone who needed that kind of work. But that is when we speak about poetry, I have to show this example as well. On the other hand, immediately after him lived a poet of whom we only know the first name, Yitzhak. Yitzhak Baal Ezrat Nashim. All we know is he authored a book called Ezrat Nashim. Now, Ezrat Nashim, when we think of it today, or Azarat Nashim, is the court of women in the Bet HaMikdash, where women would gather, meaning that's the designated area for women, so they cannot be with the men. But Yitzhak's intention in writing the poem was, I'm helping women. His intention with Ezrat Nashim, this is a book which is going to help women, and he wrote it as a protest against the previous book that we saw, Minhat Yehuda Sonei Nashim, the gift of Yehuda, the misogynist. And according to his introduction, he decided from a very young age to defend the honor of women by writing a book that will refute and reject the book of Yehuda. He wrote the Ezrat Nashim, and also he gave it to a wealthy patron, to Dros Levi Abul Afia. However, I didn't quote here. I didn't have a text to quote to show how he supports women. Shirman, who wrote the anthology. This is an anthology of Shirat Sfarad, the poetry of Sephardi Jews. He says that he was not very original in his poetry, and he imitated the style of the other book. It doesn't matter. We see that on one hand you have people who are writing poetry in support of women, and those who write against them. One more example of a woman, a poet, and that is Meresina, the rabbiness from Cherona. So we that's also from the Defined Muse from the same book. In the introduction, in the Diwan, it says that on top, Zemer ze asta eshet hayil. This poem was written by a woman of valor, Harabanit Marat Meresina, Harabanit Migerona. So we know that she's Rabbanit, and we don't know whether she's Rabbanit by her own merit or by being married to a rabbi or being a scholar. However, we have this poem by her. It's basically a prayer, but we see in the opening verses of each stanza her acrostic Mem Resh Zayin Nun Aleph Madazana. It's probably come from the word meresina, from the word merece, like merit in Spanish, which means deserving. Maybe the one allusion to the fact that a woman wrote this poem is in the third stanza, where she says Zot Halecha Barehava Mehera Shaddai Rivi Riva. It says, based on a verse in Tehillim chapter 119 where it says, Et halecha barechava ki pikudecha shamarti, I walk in the open place. I don't feel that I'm trapped in the narrow place. But she prefaces with the proposition zot, this one in the feminine. So maybe she refers to herself, and she says, I walk in the rechava, I am in an open place. Okay, from the rabbiness Meresina from Gerona, we move about 200 years, almost 300 years, to Italy, to a poet by the name Rachel Morpurgo, who was a descendant of the Luzzatto family, illustrious family. We know of Rabbi Moshe Haim Luzzatto, the author of Mesilat Yesharim, Shlomo David Luzzatto, a scholar. There was a debate about the origins of the family, but most scholars agree today that they were originally from Spain. And Rachel Morpurgo was born 1790, passed away 1871. At around the age of 50, she was praised for her poetry. People heard about her poetry, and she was praised for it. And she wrote a poem about how she felt. ואלה דברי רחל בבוא לאוזניה כשמה נזכר לתהילה במכתבי העיתים. So on hearing that she has been praised in the journals, she mourns. She says, my soul sighs, fate brings only trouble. My spirit was lifted, and I grew bold, meaning I became arrogant. I heard a voice, your poem is gold. Who, like you, has learned to sing, Rachel? My spirit in turn replies, I've lost my savor. Exile after exile has soured my skin. My taste has faded, my vineyard long gone thin. For fear of shame now I sing no longer. So there's a sort of, I see here some kind of merging between the identity of Rachel as the poet and the spirit of the Jewish people. Because she did not go in exile. She was born in Italy. Her family came from the exiles of Spain. But remember that Rachel is the mother that later on becomes identified with the Jewish people. Even though most of the tribes are the descendants of Leah, we are called Yehudim, meaning the children of Yehuda, who is the son of Leah. But the image of Rachel as the mother who's buried on the highway, who mourns for her children in poetry, in other works, always Rachel. So Rachel, I think that for her as a poet, it was easy to identify as the role of the woman, the mother of Israel, and to say, how can I sing? I'm in exile. I've lost my joy, my quality. And then she moves back to her own individual life and personality. She says, "אפנה צפון דרום קדמה וימה, דעת נשים קלה, לזאת הורמה, אחר כמה שנים הנעתה למה." I've looked to the north, south, east, and west. A woman's word in each is lighter than dust. Years hence will anyone really remember? She says, wherever I turn, any country in the world, women are considered less than men. So she uses the term that is mentioned in the Talmud, da'atan shel nashim kala, that women sort of are lightheaded. For fairness, I will just mention that the Talmud also says, bina yetera nitna lanashim. Women have greater intelligence. Maybe they were trying to speak of what today is called right brain, left brain. It is a possibility, but still, it's sort of a disparaging statement in the Talmud. Da'at nashim kala, lazot hurama. So this one, myself, who is hurama, who consider herself to be more than others, ahar kama shanim and atalama. So years from now, people will look back at what I did now and say, what was it needed for? In other words, even though she knows that she's capable, she's intelligent, she feels that within the context of society everywhere, there's no value to what she has to say. Yizkor mikelev met כל עיר כל פלך, הנה העד יעיד, תושב והלך, אין חוכמה לאישה כי אם בפלך. Who will remember her name in any city or province any more than a dead dog? That glory or that fame is not durable. Well, I wish she should have known now that we are reading that poem 170 years later, and we remember her name. So don't worry, Rachel. Should tell her that. But you see that phrase, "A woman's wisdom is only in spinning wool," keeps resurfacing. Whoever said that at the time was upset. Remember that I told you that the original statement in the Talmud was said by a rabbi who was, I think he was confronted by a woman who has too many questions, and he was upset about that. Because this line has come up several times, let's look at it here. That's the original original source of that statement in Talmud Bavli, Tractate Yoma, page 66, side 2. Here is the thing. Sha'ala isha hachama et Rabbi Eliezer. A wise woman asked Rabbi Eliezer. She said, "Me'achar shema'aseh ha'egel shavin, mipnei ma en mitatan shava." She says, many people sinned in worshiping the golden calf. Why did they die in different manners? They should all get the same punishment. And some were killed by sword, some were killed in the plague. Amar la en chokhma leisha ela bapelech. He said, women only have wisdom with the pelech. Later on, one in Midrashei Agada, they try to modify it. Some say en aval bedavar acher lo. No, actually, there's a davar acher lo has v'chalila sheyesh b'hem dat. God forbid, don't even think that they have wisdom. So this was really a bad instance that this woman came and asked the rabbi a question, and he was not ready to answer. He didn't have the right answer at the time, and instead of saying, "I don't know," that's a good question. Maybe he felt that it was a personal assault on him. Maybe there was whatever other reason that was there. His answer, this disparaging answer, became, I would say, canonized. Became part of the literature, and now you have to fight against it. So Rabbi Shmuel Arkevolti mentions that, and now we see Rachel Mulpogor mentions that as well. Okay, so now from here we'll move to another example. This is poetry about women, but not necessarily about women directly, but rather using a woman as a symbol for the leadership of Am Yisrael. And this particular one was written by Rabbi Ovadia, who was my great-grandfather, my mother's grandfather. He was born in Iraq in 1860, traveled to Israel several times, finally resettled in Iraq in 1942. It's about him that I told you the story of his daughter, my great-aunt Lulu, who came and said, "I want to study Talmud," and he said, "No, it's not for women." And then she went and she found one of the students in the yeshiva and traded with him. She taught him the book of Daniel in the very difficult Aramaic, and he taught her Talmud in return. But he had great respect for women and for all in his family, outside his family. At one point, he learned of a woman of his congregation who had postpartum depression and was sent away to a foster family, and he traveled with his daughter. He found the woman, got her food, brought her home, took care of her until she healed, and then reunited with the family and made sure that something like that would not happen again. So it was very keen and sensitive to the voice of women. And at a certain point, he writes that he felt that the women were missing from the prayers. That in the early 1900s, the prayers that he's referring to are the hakafot, that when people go around the teva, either on Simchat Torah, or they used to do it also when they visited the holy sites, they would go around the grave and chant prayers. And those prayers would mention 7 men that are called Shiva Kortei Berit, the 7 men of the covenant. It's Avraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, Moshe, Yosef, David, and Shlomo, and sometimes Pinchas, alternating. And he felt that the mothers, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, are missing. So he wrote poetry in the style of that poetry for them. And as you can see here, this is my article about him. He gave a special treatment to Rachel. He wrote a poem for her that was several times as long as the rest of the poems, and much longer than that dedicated to men. I believe that was the part was his mystical background, but also a personal element, because my great-grandmother's name was Rachel. In Arabic, they would call it Chahla, and they've lost several children when those children were infants. So when he writes in the poem about the pain of Rachel who searches for her children, it's not just the biblical Rachel who dies at the birth of Binyamin. It's not just the midrashic Rachel who mourns for her children who went in exile, but it's also his own personal loss. He wrote this poem. When he was alive, he would go with his colleagues and his disciples, other Kabbalists, to Rachel's tomb outside Yerushalayim, and they would conduct those prayers. After he passed away, people used to go visit his gravesite and read the same poems there. He passed away in 1942. So, and he is buried in Mount Olives, facing Yerushalayim. So people could go visit until 1948. 1948 to 1967. The city was in the hand of the Jordanians, so people couldn't go there. But after 1967, this has been renewed. And when I lived in Israel, I used to go there also. I haven't been able to attend one of these prayer sessions in the last 20 years, unfortunately. But I remember as a child when you would read that poem, was very powerful. People were crying. There are certain verses that I cannot read today if I read it with the tune without getting emotional, and they are really very powerful verses. The amazing thing about that poem, when we go through the poetry, is that there is a specific acknowledgement of the different role that women play as leaders. So it's not just taking Rachel as a mythical entity, and now she's the representative of the Shekhinah or the divine providence or Am Yisrael, but rather she has a special quality as a woman that enables her to be the leader where men cannot be leaders. And I think he dug it out of the Midrash, and I'll preface here for the Midrash. I'll sum it up briefly because it's important to the understanding of the poem. And I think personally that's my theory, that the Midrash I'm going to tell you, which is found in the Charabah, was either written by a woman or inspired by a woman. Her name would not be mentioned because women were not mentioned in the Midrash, but it could be that she wrote it, or that she spoke with her husband, who did have the clearance to be published, right? So the Midrash speaks about an imaginary scene that takes place in heaven after the destruction of the temple, and God tells Moshe to go and summon Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov because of the destruction. And he goes and he calls them. And And then Avraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov all come and see the devastation and the destruction, and they are shocked, and they start talking to God and sort of speaking in defense of the Jewish people and saying that they do not deserve to be punished, and please redeem them, please end their suffering. So Avraham starts speaking, and he says, I did so many things for you. I succeeded in all the trials. Wouldn't you remember my merit and save my children? God doesn't answer. Avraham moves aside. Yitzhak comes up. He says, I was willing to bind myself and die for your name's sake. And wouldn't you, in that merit, redeem my children? God doesn't answer. Yitzhak stands aside. Yaakov speaks about of his troubles and how he raised 12 children. God, again, is silent. And Yaakov moves aside. Moshe finally has a lot of arguments. He speaks about all of his dedication to the Jewish people and what he did in Egypt and in the desert. And he says, not only that, I worked so hard for you and you let me die and be buried in the desert. I didn't even have the merit to enter Eretz Israel. I only suffered with you. I only suffered with the Israelites, never enjoyed anything. And God says, nothing. And Moshe moves aside. And then the Midrash says, באותה שעה קפצה רחל ועמדה לפני הקדוש ברוך הוא. At that moment, Rachel jumped and came to speak with God. So the word Rachel jumped means both a physical and a mental status. Meaning she jumps physically, she jumps the line. There's a line of men waiting there to speak with God, and she's not summoned, she's not part of the line. She jumps the line and she comes directly to God. But also, all the other men are passive. They spoke, they move aside, they keep silent, that's it. But she's not willing to do that. And Rachel's argument is completely different. Whereas all the men are saying, I did this, therefore I deserve that, right? Let's make an exchange. God, I gave you ABC, you give me the redemption of my children. Rachel comes and says, that's in the original Midrash, it's in P'tihta 11, I believe, of Echa Rabati, of the Midrash on Echa, on Lamentations. Rachel says, remember how I let Leah take my place as my husband's wife? And that's, of course, according to the Midrash, not according to the Torah. But according to the Midrash, Rachel and Yaakov knew that Lavan is going to deceive them, and therefore they created a special password and code words for Yaakov to be able to identify Rachel when the time comes. But at the last moment, before the wedding, she felt so bad for her sister, so she gave her the password, and even hid under the bed to speak for her sister, so Yaakov would not feel that he's being cheated. So Rachel now tells God, she says, I am flesh and blood, and I had all the justification to be jealous of my sister and to not let her take my husband, yet I was able to overcome my natural jealousy and care for my sister and let her marry Yaakov. You, the eternal God, what do you care if your children serve another God? Are you jealous? Are you hurt by that? You should not be jealous. Forgive them and bring them back. And that I found amazing and audacious for whoever wrote this midrash originally. First of all, the argument is basically that avodah zarah, that idolatry, is not the ultimate sin, despite everything which is written in the Bible, in the Torah, and Vim Tuim. This is not the ultimate sin, idolatry. And in the words of Rachel in the Midrash, what do you care? Are you offended by it? But more than that is the understanding of the different point of view of men and women. Men look at this whole thing as a process, that tit for tat, I did this, I deserve that. And God doesn't answer as if, okay, your argument is invalid. Maybe you deserve a reward, but not that one. I don't even want to talk to you. Rachel comes from a different direction altogether. She says, did you see what I did? Can you see what I did? Now you do it. She says, she's an educator. She comes to God as an educator. She says, if I was able to overcome my natural jealousy and let my sister take my place, you, God, should overcome your jealousy and forgive your children and bring them back. This is, in my opinion, one of the most powerful midrashim that I find in the midrashic literature. So that is the midrash on which my great grandfather Rabbi Ovadia built his poem Zechut Rachel. And what we see here, and you could see some of my analysis here. I don't want to do everything here in the class, but what I found in this poem that there's an emphasis on family relationships, meaning all the dialogues are introduced with family relationships, and also Rachel is always described as someone who's active. She doesn't let her sorrow overwhelm her, and she knows that she must be proactive in order to save her children. So here we read in this verse, she's crying, she's mourning, she's searching for Yosef, she's searching for Binyamin. She goes to speak to the fathers, Avot Kol, Efo Banaya Yekarim, where are my dear children? And they tell her, go ask Ben Amram, go ask Moshe. She comes to him and she says, Beni Moshe, my son, Moshe. You see again the family relationship. She addresses him as a son. Beni Moshe, al teheshe, ana natashta adarim. Tell me, where have you abandoned the flocks? And he answers, crying, Lama doda at nodeda lechapes be'arim. Why, my aunt, you are traveling in the mountains? This could have been, by the way, the term doda is affectionate among Arabic speakers. The word ammi or ammiti means aunt, mother-in-law, and also a respectable woman. So maybe translated automatically from the Arabic to the Hebrew. And she answers, "It's not a time. Now is not a time for talking. I need to do something." Moshe answers, "I gave them over to Yoshua, your son." She goes to Yoshua, "My son, tell me, where are they?" And he cries with her, and together it goes up to heaven. And he says, "Domi imi me'at rega pen amud ve'egva." Please stop before I die. And it's interesting how he puts it in his mouth. Rabbi Ovadia puts the words in Yoshua's mouth. He says, I'm going to suffer. First of all, he's dead already. Where we're talking about, it's a dialogue between dead people. So it's ironic. But I think that is the kind of reaction that is selfish. He says, stop crying because I'm going to die. And I've seen that, by the way, coming from both men and women in the real world. But I think it is easier for women, from what I've sensed, easier usually for women to commiserate than it is for men. But sometimes people have this response that I actually heard it from a woman of, in the case of tragedy, that someone told me, I wish I would never have known, I would have never known that family, for example, right? People that we know, some in one of my congregations that I served at, something happened, and one person responded like that. I said, I wish that we'd never known them, meaning that she's focusing on her suffering and not that of others. But in general, I find that women commiserate more than men, and in that case, Rabbi Ovadia confronts Yoshua with Rachel. She's crying, she has no time to stop, and Yoshua tells her, please stop before I die, because I cannot bear that sorrow. So I will stop here. I will try to read the rest of the poem, and we'll discuss more in depth tomorrow. And with that, we'll almost concluding that section of poetry. I want to see if I remember the tune of how that was chanted. I haven't heard it for so long. Aye Yosef, איה חופף אהל יעל בנעורים איה בינוני לא רני ולא ינק מהדדים. So this is chanted also by the cantor in a very soulful and mournful way. And as I told you, when we were doing that, people were crying. It was a I think that the emotional load of that poem, because we all have losses in our lives, and when it's brought into focus, we're talking about a mother who lost her child, and everybody's there. I always felt that sort of like was the power tremendously to pull that out of all people, and they connected over that. So as I said, let's stop here. Tomorrow we'll continue reading that poem and read the analysis, and we have one more poem to read. One more point to look at Haim Ovadia, and then we'll move to the next subject, which is modesty.